Okay guys, so let's go for the next section and we are going to see how I usually play against 3-bet when I'm out of the blinds. Uh, Basically there are two main spots. We can be playing in position or we can be playing out of position. When we are playing in position we are facing a 3-bet from one of the blinds, and when we are out of position we will be facing one 3-bet from the middle cut of our button. We'll go first for the first spot. When we face the 3-bet from the blinds, it's a very good spot to check with PioSolver and Poker Snowy, both softwares. The good thing about Poker Snowy is that it's much more flexible when we write down one scenario, because it's going to take into account all the different factors that we need to know. For example, if I raise here and then, if I raise here something like this and then I receive some folds, it's going to be able to say me how much I have to, okay, let's do one new scenario. Okay, let's go for a 10-20 spot, and imagine I raise here and the small line is 3-betting me and he's 3-betting me extremely B. So basically it's going to take into account all the factors and it's going to give me a preflop advice which will be pretty good. It's not going to be perfect and it's going to be less accurate than, for example, PioSolver for most situations. The good thing is that it's going to be a few clicks from you, while PioSolver you will need to write down every single spot and see how it works. So you need to do every single one simulation to check all the sizings, all the positions, and all the stack sizes that you are playing. The 4-bet strategy is much better, like the one that is going to be used by PioSolver, because it's going to, let's see, for example here, it's going to use a much better strategy and much more polarized, and it's going to be much more accurate. But we will see later how can we face with 4-bet in the next section. The good thing about here is that we'll need to take into account what's the position of the 3-better, who is he 3-betting against, so it's going to give us the idea about what his range is, and then also we'll take into account his sizing, of course, the sizing of the 3-bet, and it's going to determine greatly what's going to be our range that we have to play. The latest factor that we'll have into account is the post-flop game. If he's making a very high continuation betting through the pots, we should be tightening up pre-flop. However, if he has very low continuation bet post-flop, or for example he has a very weak post-flop game in the turn, probably we could be calling with some extra hands from the GTO range, because our opponent is not going to materialize enough. So the thing about this is, I mean, like, the first thing I usually take into account is the positions, so then I determine which is his range, and then depending on the sizing I'll be calling with some hands or another. It's really important to be flexible to the sizing, and in my opinion most people are flexible to the positions but they are not flexible to the sizing, and everyone is overcalling to the big sizings. So if you go here, for example, to the range advice, it's going to say you to fold 63% against a very big sizing. And if you go, for example, for something like 170, it's going to be telling you to fold something much lower, something closer. Okay, yeah, it's folding, sorry. And it's going to give you, it's going to be folding around 35%. Is this accurate? Probably not, let's say here half of the pot is again 40%. It's not perfectly accurate. I'll use always half pot, but it's not perfectly accurate. But however, I think it sums up really a lot of the things that we need to take into account. Sizing is one of the most important things, and people don't take it into account enough. Like, they try to figure out what's their opponent's range, if they are polarized or not, post-flop tendencies, etc. But they don't really take into account a lot of the times the sizing, or they just lie to themselves saying, okay, I'm going to outplay my opponent and then I'm going to play this range instead of a tighter range. The best way to work on this is you go to Hold'em Manager and you check every single hand that you're playing, and then you start going pretty fast and you try to see what kind of hands that you might have in some mistakes. The next point is trying to be honest with you and say, I'm tighter by nature or I'm too loose by nature. Like, I am playing on the tighter side or on the looser side. And probably here you'll see what are your regular mistakes. For example, I usually call to match the 3-bet even if they are too big. So I have realized about this, and when I'm playing I usually say, okay, you should tighten up if you have some questions. So every time I'm not sure and I have some doubts, I usually tend to fold because I know that my nature goes for the loser side. Side thing, the most important thing for me. Second thing, of course, the positions, but everyone takes into account then the post-flop skills. The post-flop skills most of the times is based on how much my opponent makes a continuation bet, and usually if we are playing, if he usually plays weak or not on the turn or the river. The latest factor, which I think it can change drastically, is how deep we are playing. If we are playing deep stack, my opponent will be facing a spot where he is out of position with a high stack to pot ratio and without initiative. And as we said in previous videos, this is the hell. It's like playing blind versus blind, and he should be trying to avoid. Especially in the boards where we are hitting the nuts and he's not, like let's say for example 5-4 deuce, we can put a lot of pressure on our opponent, as we will see in the post-flop videos. When this happens, it's really important that if we are playing deep stack and we are aggressive enough, we have a lot of aggressivity, we can call with a wider range because we're going to be able to outplay our opponent from the pot. It's really important that we play really aggressive in this kind of spots and try to figure out how can we bluff our opponent and if he's the kind of guy who will spew too many chips. If he's not spewing a lot, then we should go for a wider range because we are going to play much better than him. About the hands that are calling the 3-bet, we can go here. Most of the times it's going to be ace-X suited, of course suited connectors, poker pairs, and the X-off hands, which many people used to call them, and this has changed a lot. People tend to call ace-10 off, king-jack off, queen-jack off, jack-10 off, even king-10 and queen-10, and people have started already folding them. Still, they call too much, and I think that people should be folding more, given that the pre-flop 3-bets are every time more linear, and they are including less offsuit hands and more suited hands, and they are tight enough to be folding all these hands. So my recommendations is just try to call a bit more on this side than on this side if you are playing deep stack, because also the flush draws are more important than the top pairs when you're playing deep stack poker. When you are playing, for example, let's go to the second scenario, which is when you are playing out and you face a 3-bet out of position and your opponent, okay, we fold. Let's say we raise here, our opponent 3-bets here, fold, then how can we play this spot? I think that we should be playing on the tighter side most of the times because our opponent will play well and probably will have to look into his statistics. Most people don't have a very GTO strategy in this kind of spots. We should have some stats from our opponents and we can see what are his tendencies. There are some people 3-betting here around 15% and there are some people 3-betting 5%. So imagine how 3x can change drastically a situation if the range is 3x wider or not. So my recommendations is have a look on your opponent's range. Many people have weird ranges, they haven't built it well, they are extremely loose, they're extremely tight, and we need to know this before we can go. And I suggest to be, if your opponent is tight, try to be extremely tight, and if your opponent is loose, don't try to tighten her up, just 4-bet a lot and try to put your opponent in a very uncomfortable zone, because I think it's going to work pretty well. I know this sounds really theoretic, but in the play and explain section, we'll probably see a couple of spots, a couple of situations where we can find how I usually try to exploit people who are playing this way. As well, we will see with some heads-up display how I usually exploit these kind of tendencies and how I find these kind of tendencies to exploit. About the hands that we are calling the 3-bet, I recommend that you also have a look onto your holding manager or poker tracker and you see every single hand and see how you are usually approaching this, and if you are very far from Poker Snow with pure silver at every spot, and if you are very far, try to say, okay, I'm making a mistake in this part of the range most of the times, or I'm not. Well, pre-flop, as I said, is a question on how much you work away from the tables. It's not how much you just have like 10 seconds decisions. You are not going to improve this way. You will only improve if you work away from the tables. So if you want to improve, really, it's going to be one of the worst parts of your work, of your job, but you need to spend some time with solvers to see what are the optimal ranges and what you considered what that was the range. And if you didn't even have a range, let's try to build your first one. Okay. The latest thing I want to say is that if we are playing the stack again in this situation, even if we don't have the initiative, the thing that we are playing a high stack to put ratio out of position will make that it's a bad situation to be calling too wide. So if we are playing the stack, I recommend to be folding a bit more than most people do. Not try to call given the odds are very good. Don't like the implied odds most of the times don't exist, especially if you are not as good as your opponent, or even if you are as good as your opponent. So you need to be better than him to be calling wide the 3-bet, because he's going to be playing pretty well. Yeah, so this is, yeah, I think this is the way I usually approach when I'm playing, and when I'm staying away from the tables, I recommend you to do the same.